next guest, a fascinating author. My next guest is the Executive Vice President and the Dean of the School of Management at Laurel University in High Point, North Carolina, and he is the author of a wonderful leadership book called Preactive Leadership. Please welcome to TCT, Dr. Owen Allen. Dr. Allen, how are you, sir? It's a pleasure to be with you, pleasure to meet you. You're a wonderful, my uncle used to tell me, you know, you're a gentleman and a scholar, but you really are a gentleman and a scholar. I'm so happy to meet you, and I want our home audience and our viewing audience to get to meet you, but the first thing I want to do is find out a little bit about how you came to know the Lord and what brought you into the field of ministry and study that you're in now.
Well, obviously it's a very long trail and story, but I've been a Christian since a small child. I remember giving my first testimony to the church when I was 11.
Wow.
This was in Florida. I'm a Floridian.
Okay.
My parents were very active in church in those days, and then eventually I joined the Marines and left Florida and have traveled worldwide ever since. As we were talking in the green room, I lived for about 12 years in St. Louis, was connected with the space program in the early days in the 60s. But what you probably don't know, and what my book doesn't mention because it's a textbook for management students in college, but I've been an ordained minister, was vice chairman of the Evangelical Church Alliance out of Chicago, 2,200 ministries. And I've traveled internationally with them, ministered in Korea and various places. So it's a very long story.
You're a world traveler. You've had a lot of opportunities in this world, and that's afforded you obviously a great deal of education, data, and references. And when did you get to the point where you knew that you were called to do something scholastically, or you knew you were called to do something as it pertains to leadership?
Well, I sort of grew into it, really. As I sometimes say, I've had a foot in both worlds.
Right, right.
I've been in management, as I mentioned, since the 60s. Came to Laurel University, which was the formerly John Wesley College in High Point, founded in 1903. I joined the school in 1993 as a full professor of management, but part-time. Sure. And then in 2008, I was called to be dean of the School of Management. Right. While all that was happening, I was doing ministry too. So I've kept a foot in both worlds most of my life, really.
Like our last guest, there's such a need to understand faith as it relates to education. They're not mutually, dissected from each other. You have the opportunity, have had the opportunity to be in some really unique places as a person of faith where you've been able to exercise what you know. I was fascinated by your interaction with NASA. Tell us a little bit about NASA or GE or some of these other corporations that opened their doors to you.
Well, professionally, before I went full-time in academia, I was what was known as a management trainer.
Right.
And so I've spoken all over the world to all the major companies, as you mentioned, a few there. My major clients over the years were John Deere, General Electric, Ingersoll Rand, other such companies. And although, of course, my father was a consultant before me, and he always said, never mix politics or religion with a business conference. And so it was interesting that I tried to do that, but of course, I guess your witness shines through. And oddly enough, in these secular seminars, I would have people come up to me at coffee break and say, I can't put my finger on it.
Right.
There's something different about you.
There it is.
What is it? And I've led more than one person to Christ in my corporate seminars. You mentioned NASA. I was with the McDonnell Douglas Corporation. I mentioned that I'd lived in St. Louis, and at that time they had the Mercury program.
Sure.
And then eventually that grew into the Apollo program. Sure. And so I was instrumental in some research and training with those groups. It was a wonderful, I was telling you in the green room, energizing, exciting time in American history.
Absolutely.
Starting with John F. Kennedy's wonderful speech. And I've never really seen people, they actually had cots by their desks and never went home, some of them.
Exactly.
Lived off pizza and cots, you know, so
yeah.
It was a wonderful time in American history.
You know, so many times we understand as men of faith that the Bible tells us to go into all the world, every system, education, government, entertainment, to carry the gospel, the good news. But we also find that many of those places we go into, there's a very defined resistance to, as you say, mixing, not because they're necessarily mean-spirited, but because, you know, that can get dicey. Did you begin to see that you were developing ways to put the principles of the kingdom or the Word of God there without, say, the church language or the more overt expressions? How did you go about the way that you felt you were called to minister to leaders?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because this book that we're talking about mentions on the cover, if you happen to be a church leader, among other types of leaders. I snaked that in.
I saw that.
But what we say in the book is everyone is a leader, even if they don't know it.
Absolutely. They have influence.
Absolutely, because of the influence.
Right.
Who are you influencing?
Who are you influencing?
So you may be influencing children as a parent. You may be influencing church as a pastor. The principles are the same. I've always been interested in researching principles and finding out the basic laws of all subjects.
Right.
And I've tried to do that in this case in leadership.
I think I know your feeling on this, but I want to confirm my suspicion. Anybody with the proper training can be developed into a better leader.
Absolutely.
And do you find that you've used different mechanisms as it relates? I imagine you standing in front of a group of people, 30, 40, 60, 100 perhaps, and you've got to reach, like any teacher, all these different personality types and learning styles. You know, how do you navigate those waters to make sure that you can bring leadership out of this one, where his personality or her personality may be very much different from that one?
One of the things that I've already mentioned that I found has been very, very helpful in my life is whatever subject you're working in, stick to principles.
Right.
As a friend of mine used to say, don't make a safari into minutia.
Yeah.
Stick with the principles.
Right.
And also the techniques that I actually mentioned here, such as defining what I call fuzzy words.
Yeah.
I try to always stay away from fuzzy words and always stick to principles. And you'd be surprised at what a small body of knowledge you might say. For example, I've always taught that the entire field of management is based upon 20 simple principles.
Wow.
And I touch upon those ideas in this book. So you can narrow it. And then I've always tried to reach people. Funny thing, very quickly, the John Deere Company one time called me many years ago and they said, can you write at 10th grade level? And I said, pardon me? They said, well, we want you to write a training program for our machine operators, and they have an average 10-year level of education.
Sure.
So I said, well, I don't know, but I'll try. Well, as you know, there is a technique in the Word program that will tell you what level you're writing at.
Right.
So I geared down and geared down and geared down. Well, what's interesting is I never went back up.
Right.
And so that's hopefully this book is written in a very simple, easy to read, easy to understand language. No $20 words in it.
Exactly.
So it's funny how God does things at the time you don't understand what He's doing.
It is. I've often been a little bit embarrassed when I talk to people about books that read novels, because I can't usually converse with them about certain novels that are out, because my reading has always been somewhat technical. I love reference books. I love books that are have a scholastic nature to them. So I'm reading not so much for entertainment, but to be educated. So as a young man, I'm looking at men like Tom Peters and other business writers and business leaders. But as I came to the Lord, I found that probably 95% of what they espouse, write, and teach comes straight out the Bible.
Yes.
Do you find that same kind of
Absolutely
dynamic?
true. Absolutely.
It's those principles.
And we would expect that. Yeah, the principles again.
Right.
And although many of them are in this book, you know, the whole, many of the ideas that we're talking about, such as you know, one of the principles in the book is to always that's where the name comes from, pre-action, which is a word I coined many years ago.
Like why did you say preactive rather than proactive?
Okay, proactive is a common word, but pro means in favor of, Pre means to do something before something else. And what the philosophy of this book is take action before trouble strikes.
Before trouble strikes.
Not after, which is reactive.
Sure.
And so when you think about it, and that includes a world-famous preventive action. I've got a whole chapter teaching you how to take preventive actions. And when you think about it, though, Christianity is probably the greatest preactive step made in history.
Absolutely.
And the best way we can live preactively, or if you want to say preventively, is to be Christians and walk in the Spirit.
I love the way, you know, some of your verbiage. You use terms like effective behavior, and you teach on how to, and I'm paraphrasing, how to basically identify personality types or behavior types as a leader, as a manager, as a teacher. What do you find, just in a broad stroke, what do you find that most of us as individuals fall into as far as our learning style or our effective behavior types?
Well, I've always taught that there are 4 basic personalities. They're mixed, but they're 4.
Sure.
One is a very aggressive style that learns very aggressively and very belligerently.
Right.
You know, one is a very laid-back, comical style that likes to have fun with their learning.
Right.
One is a very serious, methodical style that learns very methodically. And then one is the expert style, which so many I knew at McDonnell Douglas, for example, engineers, accountants, those kind of people who learn very rigidly what is right and wrong.
Right.
So I've had a lot of fun over the years telling groups about personality.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, I met your lovely wife in the green room. You have children?
Yes, indeedy. We have 4 children,
Wonderful.
12 grandchildren.
And did you find yourself defaulting into your training as a leader or as a trainer as it related to raising your kids?
Well, I made all the mistakes that they can make. You know, as the old joke goes, by the time you learn to be a parent, it's too late.
Too late. They're parents, right?
But we've been blessed. God has been merciful, and our children are all successful, and they live in other states.
Sure.
But in fact, oddly enough, my son is under contract to Boeing Aircraft.
Wow.
He's an electronic warfare specialist.
Look at that.
So it's, you know, it's
Wow.
God's been very forgiving.
He is basically right there for rocket scientists. I tell you, that's something.